what you're enduring every day as a farmer with this pressure on you.
G'day. Thanks, Vikki, and thanks everyone for coming out on Sunday afternoon. Yeah, it's further than just a personal story. Like you hear about how it affects us personally, but everyone's under pressure in their own way with their own lives. But the big picture for me is why are we doing this to ourselves? I mean, we know running a business and raising families is hard enough, so why do governments always seem to make life harder? And that's what this seems to be to me. There's no net benefit. To me, the whole thing doesn't work from an engineering perspective, and it'll consume more resources to produce a little amount of power, and that goes back to the energy density stuff that Paul talked about, that we're exporting high dense energy products and getting back low energy products, and that's going to result in a net increase in consumption of resources, fuel, everything to produce the same amount of power. That's the laws of thermodynamics. So it's counterproductive to the stated aim. And if any of you have been paying attention, you'd notice that just about everything the government says in the narrative, the results are the exact opposite, and I see this as being no different. So what offends me most about the whole renewables push is not having to look at them or hear them. It's that they just don't work, and they're a grossly inefficient way to do anything. You could not think of a worse way to produce bulk power. In our res, which is where Kathryn and I live, Central West Res, there's 14.6 gigawatt of so-called renewable projects planned to be built at this stage. New South Wales alone only, and I say that in inverted commas, consumes 10 gigawatt at any time. So they want to build 14.6 alone in our res, and there's 5 reses in New South Wales. So that highlights the gross inefficiency of this, and it highlights they know that it's grossly inefficient. And what compounds that is, despite Dubbo in the centre of the res being surrounded by 14.6 gigawatt of production, they're still going to have to put a gas plant. So the whole scheme is absurd. And then you've got the transmission, which if we stuck to baseload thermal power, we wouldn't need any of that. And transmission and distribution is over like 49% of your power bill. So there's just so many absurdities in all of this, and we're being told it's good and for the greater good, and it takes away from food production as well, but I won't go into that area right now. So it's just offensive at every level, and we shouldn't have to put up with it.
And Kathryn, tell us a bit about your story and what you're up against in this.
We've got about 370 wind turbines around us. We've got a wind farm immediately on our western boundary and one on our northern boundary. Now, as farmers, we're somewhat obsessed with the weather, understandably, because our livelihood depends on it. So we watch the temperature, we watch the frost, we watch the wind, we watch the sun. We're always watching the wind map. We farm quite a bit of wheat and canola, and we also grow beef cattle. So we know that the weather's unreliable, and we can't understand how you can build a power system on an unreliable source. So we've got still 4 working windmills that water 4 different paddocks. But that's not our only source of water in those paddocks, because we know that we're going to get really hot days and we're going to have stock in the paddock and we're not going to have any wind. So we have Plan B, and Plan B is more reliable baseload water. Now, if we're building a system reliant on wind and sun, people call us whinging farmers because we're obsessed with the weather, but we know that we're not going to get the wind when we need it, we're going to have too much wind when we don't want it, and we're not going to get the sun when we need it. So we just know that we're being destroyed for no benefit to the environment, B, the economy, and we're all going to pay for it in terms of our power prices, because it's just simply not reliable. So the consultation process is non-existent. They don't really care about it. It's just a tick-a-box exercise. They're just going to plough on and do this unless we, as a voting population, say no. We want reliable power, and we don't want to destroy our environment and our agricultural land in order to achieve unreliable power and then pay through the nose in our electricity bills for baseload power. We don't want to build two systems. We want one, and one that works all the time, and the supply is so great that it drives the price down.
But Wade, so often we're the coal-hugging troglodyte, or we're the NIMBYs for talking about this stuff. What's your opinion?
Thanks, Vikki. So, with Billboard Battalion, I've been in the ag politics for about 40 years and seen a lot of things happen. And I think with everything, if you understand what's happening, you can understand what the problem is. And so many people say, oh, this stuff with so many issues, this is stupid. You know, what's going on here? Why don't these politicians understand how much damage they're doing, etc., etc.? And if we understand that, you know, our governments now do not work for the Australian people, they work for foreign entities, you know, where... So, you know, going back to 1973, the Lima Agreement, you go back to the Agenda 21, you'll go to all the World Economic Forum, World Health Organisation and the United Nations. These people are in the business of wiping us out. This is why this is happening. And as a farmer, I'm third-generation farmer from North Central Victoria, we are being smashed. You know, they want to put a wind facility right across the road from our place now in the Goulburn Valley. You know, we're seeing the power companies come through and they're saying, oh, well, look, you know, we'll pay you all this money for these wind turbines and we'll make sure we decommission them. That'll be in the contracts. No, it's not going to be. You're going to see companies that tell you this garbage and then they fall over or they sell it and then you're stuck with it. And we're already seeing banks who are evaluating your loan criteria based on the fact that your property is being devalued. And you're going to see farmers who are left with what, $600,000 per wind turbine to decommission this stuff is going to be worth more than your farm is. So these are what we find. We travel all over Australia. I do a lot of educational speaking, a lot of political lobbying, and this is what's happening. So we as the people need to understand this, and these are great forums. I'm so grateful to be invited here to speak today. And one of the biggest problems we've got right now, and we must all, everybody who has a platform or a forum or a voice or whatever, today must get onto your federal politicians and tell them you can take your misinformation and disinformation bill and shove it right up your backside. And I'll just finish if I can. Okay, well, you can go and take a coffee break. Yeah, so we are talking to a lot of, in particular, farmers who have got the infrastructure that is going to impact their properties right now. And, you know, I've been involved with a crowd around Western Victoria who have gone down the path of the transmission lines. They listen to the politicians, they tell them they're going to be their friends and all this other crap. They tell them they're not going to support this, but guess what, we don't have the numbers. Well, here's the deal. The politicians are not your friends. I can tell you that right now. And they always come up with excuses. We've dealt with this with all the water, the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, the North-South Pipeline, and they just suck you in. So we, the people, and particular agriculture, we have the capacity. We've got the clout. We've got the public credibility to take this on and say what's happening here is not an isolated thing. It's all part of the big picture. It's all part of the Great Reset. It's all part of Klaus Schwab and these other scumbags' ideas to wipe us out. So we the people, we the farmers, we can lead this stuff. We've got the capacity and we must come together. I'm on the National Farmers Federation's case, Joe Hinkie and the rest of them, saying you better get your act together and start acting as a unit, as a fighting unit. We need to pull our country together. We need the trade unions on board. We need our farmers. We need our political people, our footy clubs, whatever we've got going on in society. We need to pull a whole lot together and say, this is the base problem, because once you understand what the problem is, then we can actually do something about it. And it's impossible to fight a war if you don't even understand you're in one.
And this is a war, and at the moment, it's regional New South Wales, which is the battleground. So what is the next step? Who wants to go?
Yeah, well, it's the whole country. I mean, anyone that saw Alex Nichols' video interview yesterday from WA was very good on what they're facing over there, like a 400 square kilometre, I think 400 turbine farm out near Kelberan. So it's a nationwide problem. None of us, that's the thing, we can't work as a division, we can't work as just a state or a region or just a local group. Like Wade said, we do need to combine resources, and I think the door's ajar a little bit, but unless we all get together and put our shoulder against it, we can't crash through, and that's what we really need to do. So all the regions and all the disaffected people that have been misserved by supposedly our governments, we do need to unite and put petty differences aside, because just NREN and just our local groups alone, we're not going to have critical mass. So we do need to combine, and that involves everyone in the cities as well that's, again, trying to raise families and run businesses. We're all affected by this, and we all deserve better.
Kathryn, what is it that you want people in the city to know about what you're enduring in Coolah?
I want them to know that what we're enduring in Coolah is not just an us problem. The problem is going to ripple through the whole Australian economy, because we are not going to have reliable power. If we push on with this, we're destroying our environment, we're destroying our agricultural land, and we're not going to have any reliable energy. So it's not just an us problem, it's going to leak out into major centres sooner rather than later. Yeah, well, one thing that people don't understand is all this is backed up by diesel generators. So in our area, we've got, wind turbines that have to be heated all the time. They're going to have to be attached to the grid all the time. So the substations around those projects are going to have to be backed up by diesel generation. Otherwise, they're going to be sucking power out of the grid. The gas firming stations, there's one proposed for Dubbo. It'll be backed up by diesel generator. You can't have that slip up when the country needs baseload power, and that's what's supposedly going to come in and back up the unreliable wind and solar. The other thing is that we're exporting all our gas, and so we're going to have to import our gas. Thus, one of our great Australians has built a gas import plant down at Port Kembla. So he's building the wind turbines, and then he's building the gas import terminal, and he's the same bloke building the gas firming station in Dubbo. So he's starving us of energy, and then he's going to import the energy to make us pay through the nose for the energy. I won't mention his name, but everybody knows him. I don't know why he still has a passport. So we're facing the foreigners who own all our energy production. I mean, this is not about... We're subsidising it. We're paying for it through our super funds. We're paying for it through our, it's all funded. If anyone's got shares in anything, they're all investing in it. And we're paying for it through our electricity bills. Now, the extent that they don't care, I'll give you one example of what's happening on our place. Grant is the aviation expert, but we have quite a substantial airfield on our property. It's an agricultural airfield, and it has 200,000 litres of gravity-fed water at one end. So it's a significant fire management resource in the district. It can't land the Hercs, but it can land the 802 air tractor, which carries 3,000 litres of water. Now, there's only 2 airstrips in our district with that water on it, and they're going to just negate that fire management resource with the proximity of turbines beside it. But they don't care, because it's not actually about producing electricity. It's just about mining subsidies, mining money. So we can talk all we like about, the death of koalas, don't care. The death of wedge-tailed eagles, don't care. The loss of box gum woodland, they don't care. The disabling of fire management resources, don't care. They don't care about any of that. The disabling of prime agricultural land because you can't get agricultural equipment underneath it because you've got an easement underneath the transmission line of 4.5 metres. I can tell you that none of our equipment is less than 4.5 metres high. All modern farming equipment actually increases with size. Modern equipment is always growing bigger because you get more efficiency out of it. So they don't care about any of that. They don't care. It doesn't matter what you throw at them. They don't care because the government sanctions this unregulated mining of subsidies to overseas companies or to un-Australians, like the fellow, I won't mention his name, because he's very litigious.
Then we'll go to Sandra Bourke.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much. So a part of our job is to bring metro in together with rural and regional. And we present in many metropolitan areas throughout Melbourne. And if people know what's happening in metropolitan areas, if people know what's happening with farmers, they come on board. And what's happening is we're not telling them. And the politicians, I've seen this, the politicians will deliberately create a divide between country people and rural people. Metropolitan. And I saw this with Anne Webster do this specifically on public meetings about the transmission lines. This is their tactic. They keep everybody separated. They do not want us to operate together. So after the last 40 years, the politicians have deliberately destroyed our coal-fired power baseload capacity. They have deliberately run it down to the point where they're telling us it's no good. This renewable stuff cannot work. It cannot deliver us reliable baseload power. It's just that simple. Now, in Victoria, we heard some talking here today about gas. In Victoria, the footprint for the renewable infrastructure is going to occupy 70% of Victoria's farmland. At the end of the day, that's its. Enough of that. So that's the situation. You know, our farmers are in big trouble. We need to understand the big picture stuff. We can do our protests and so on all we like, but we must bring the community on board. That is an absolute must.
Thank you so much. All right. That's it. Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Kathryn. Thank you, Wade.
You're more than welcome.
Let's keep talking.
All right, thank you, everyone. It says in this document that there are significant challenges for onshore wind and solar to meet all of our net zero energy needs. Analysis indicates that to meet net zero targets using onshore renewables could require up to 70% of Victoria's agricultural land to host wind and solar. So what this document is saying, they will need to use 70% of Victoria's agricultural land to get to net zero with wind and solar. This next page shows a map. Now, it says down under Victoria that the agricultural land in Victoria would be it currently is 170,000 square kilometres. So 70% of that is almost 89,000 square kilometres that they will need for wind and solar to get to net zero. So this is what we're trying to push back against. The offshore wind project in Gippsland in Victoria is going to be 15,000 square kilometres. That's the size of East Timor. So that's the scale of all this madness. I'm going to call it madness. Our next speaker is Sandra Bourke. Now, Sandra's also facing a massive wind project in her community. She's a lifesaver and former cop, and she's given her life to serve her community. And now she's stepping up to fight for all of us in Australia as the new Advance Australia spokeswoman. So please welcome Sandra Bourke.
Thank you. It's great to be here this afternoon. Thank you. And it's important to talk about the future of Australia's environment and energy landscape because our nation is at a crossroad. Aussie families are struggling with the cost of living in every direction, and the cost of energy is a massive driver of that struggle. And while self-interested activists whisper in the ear of our elected officials all sorts of nonsense about renewable energy affordability, we are being threatened with a so-called misinformation bill to shut us up when we point out the truth. How many people here have had their Facebook accounts shut down? Just a show of hands. All of mine. Only this month, Labor decided to add political content into their so-called misinformation bill to stifle free speech online, and just in time for the federal election. It's good to see that the coalition will be opposing this pending disaster for our great democracy. We look out the window and we tell the truth. We just saw the panel tell the truth about what we see, about what's happening, and we get told that we are extremists or cookers or much worse. Why is this happening? Because the elites and the activists, those unnamed people that we just mentioned, who are running Australia, are no longer in touch with your everyday concerns. They are no longer focused on Australia's freedom, prosperity and security. They are in no way focused on delivering affordable, reliable energy, nor on protecting and cultivating our environment. They are no longer listening to us, to everyday Australians, and I know this firsthand. I come from the New South Wales mid-coast, and not long ago, my local community was hit with a proposal for a massive wind turbine installation. It will forever damage and change over 800 square kilometres of pristine coastline. 300 useless turbines destroying our environment, including the endangered Gould's petrel that lives in one place on the planet, the island you can see, the Cabbage Tree Island, now at risk. Back then, I believed that when we spoke up to defend our way of life, our homes, our environment, the government and the bureaucrats would listen. But they do not listen, because it turns out that these community-destroying renewable projects are not as green as you think. On both a local and a national scale, they are about dollars and destruction. On the dollars side, Australia once benefited from some of the lowest consumer electricity prices in the industrialised world. And today, we have some of the highest. And this is because, under the Albanese Labor government, under Chris Bowen, the total system cost is blowing out. Yes, the sun shines, the wind blows, but the cost of the physical infrastructure, the thousands of turbines, the hundreds of transmission towers, the millions, 9 million, solar grid panels, inverters, batteries, your smart meters, all ramp up the total system cost. And so does their full replacement every 20 or 30 years. And as the total system costs continue to go up and up, you will pay more in your bills and you will pay more as taxpayers. And who, may you ask, is benefiting? The billion-dollar foreign companies who are making huge profits because of the subsidies paid by you, the Australian taxpayer. And then there is the destruction. Chris Bowen's renewables are destroying our reliable baseload capability. And you can see here from the people today, they are crushing our regional communities. Cheap, reliable baseload power, our coal and gas, is being deliberately run down. And at the same time, unreliable and inconsistent renewables are exerting unprecedented pressure on our grid. To work, the grid must be stable. The instability created by intermittent renewables means that the overall cost of generating electricity is increasing across our system. The cost of electricity for our industry, for our businesses, and for our families goes up. In fact, since Labor started this roll-up, our bills have increased by 20%. The Labor Green Teal Renewables program is destroying and dividing hundreds of regional communities. The communities like mine who protest are ignored, we are vilified or steamrolled, despite petitions and protests and government reviews such as the Dyer Review that have identified the same thing. Chris Bowen has responded with disinterest and frankly contempt. And that's why I and many people here today have been forced into action. Across Australia, like-minded people, the people you just saw standing here on the panel, not just from my community, but I've had emails and letters from every state and every territory are standing up. And that is why the volunteers, and I stress volunteers, the thousands of volunteers in the National Rational Energy Network and the grassroots Reckless Renewables movement formed to stand up. And that is now why Advance is gearing up for a massive nationwide campaign. We will stand up with you. On the 6th of February in 2024, I watched thousands of people who had come from all over Australia to protest against the government's community-crushing rollout of renewables. Many of them were people like you, or people like me. I've never been involved in politics. We had people there from hugely diverse views who had voted for every party. But on that day, we were united, empowered by the shared need to stop the pending destruction to our homes, to our communities, to our land, our seas, and our wildlife. That afternoon, hundreds of us, myself included, stood up in question time to protest when Chris Bowen spoke. We did this even though security ordered us to turn our T-shirts inside out and to stay seated. We were ignored by the chamber and we were ordered to leave. Whatever we have tried has failed. For me personally, I understood that from that day, our government is itself denigrating our democracy. This is what happens when politicians stop listening to ordinary Australians and take the side of activists and elites. It is now clear from their destructive renewables to the ute tax, to the proposed 2030 ban on oil vehicles, from their so-called Ministry of Truth misinformation bill, to the release of criminal illegal immigrants, the Labor, Green and Teals are led by self-interest and not our national interest. They are placing their activist ideology first, and they are sidelining and bullying communities and people like you and people like me who dare to stand up. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is time to build a political force that they can no longer ignore. And that is why I ended up becoming an Advance spokeswoman. It is the reason I am here today. Advance is powered by 330,000 ordinary Australians. So I know what you see in the media, but they're funded by 330,000 ordinary Australians to campaign against the activists and elites in charge. And unlike the government and the activists, we are about putting the voice of mainstream Australia front and centre. We are about pushing back against the agenda of the extreme Greens, the activists and others that hurt our way of life. Advance delivers strong, targeted, independent, and I stress independent campaigns that uphold our democratic values of security, energy security, freedom of speech, and prosperity. You should not be paying that much for your electricity bills. Right now, Advance is focused on two critical issues that I think are really important to you here today. Our first campaign is our Greens Truth campaign. This will be a major part of our election effort. For too long, the Greens have had a free ride on their old reputation of a minor party that cares about trees, whales and oceans. Today, this is rubbish. Where are they? I recently travelled the eastern seaboard to film a mini documentary. I have seen firsthand the damage being done to our environment, the bulldozed rainforests, the dead and displaced wildlife, and not a green to be seen. Unforgivable hypocrisy and silence. Here is one of our interviews, if the audio works. And it didn't. So, we'll have our documentary coming out in about 6 to 8 weeks, and that will include interviews with hundreds of former Green voters, despairing the fact that they no longer care about the environment. The Greens have become an extreme left-wing group of activists with concrete plans to make Australian families worse. Plans like massive, unaffordable increases in public bans on fossil fuels like coal and gas, severe restrictions on farming. You've seen that happen with the Keep